Welcome everyone. It is Michael from Offshore Citizen. We are here at my home in Bulgaria, and we are going to talk a little bit about the subject of what is the best jurisdiction to form an offshore company. So if you've watched some of our previous videos, you can see, the idea of offshore is really a company outside of your own country. And the big thing I want to tell you from the get-go is there is no one size fits all. There is no best place to form a company, etc. So there's a little bit of a trick. Anyone who tells you or is pushing a particular jurisdiction doesn't know what they're talking about. They're just selling. And you need to look at the situation for you, okay? So I'm gonna try and give you some of the places that I think today are some of the better ones. That has changed a lot in the last, say, 5 to 10 years. 5-10 years ago, we were saying that for a lot of people, hey, we'd form in Marshall Islands, in Samoa, in Anguilla, etc. And we pretty much don't do that at all anymore. And the reason it's changed a lot is due to banking and due to substance. You can check out, we have some videos both on both of those subjects, and we're gonna have lots more as well. So what are we considering when we're thinking about where to form a company? Well, what people typically think is, hey, we're thinking about taxes. This is a really common thing. That's a bit of a misnomer. There is certainly an element of tax almost always when we're thinking about where to form an offshore company. However, if it was as easy as forming a company in a country where you have no tax and paying no tax, the tax departments around the world would be out of business. So it doesn't work that way. You can watch our videos on management control and corporate residency, etc., for an explanation of how actually international tax does work and how the important thing is not just where the company is registered. That being said, it is necessary to register in a country with favorable tax laws because, for example, you pretty much can't have low tax if you have, as an example, a German or an Australian company, okay? So that's one thing that we will consider is, all right, what is the tax situation there? Next thing that we may consider, and let's go through quickly. When we're talking about taxes, you can go and watch our videos. There's territorial tax, there is zero tax, there's remittance-based tax, there's different tax systems. So it's more complicated than just the tax rate that you might be facing right off the top. So I'll give you a really quick example. Apple was famous for using Ireland for a lot of years. Now Ireland has a 12.5% tax rate, which is not that low, right? If you consider that in the UK, you could pay like 19%. Okay, you get a bit of a benefit, but it's not nearly zero tax. Apple paid close to zero tax. Why? Because they didn't pay that headline rate because they had something called a non-resident company. Okay, so there's lots of nuances, and if you're interested in that, if you're interested in, okay, how do I legally structure this to minimize my tax? Contact us because it will vary by where you're from, where your operations are, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so that being said, common places that you may look today to have low tax will typically not be British Virgin Islands, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, Nevis, Cook Islands, Vanuatu, Seychelles. Like all these traditional tax havens are pretty much out today. So it's 2019 right now, it's gonna be 2020 soon. In this day and age, those places are pretty much out for a long time. That was the way we would look at it. Pretty much you can forget about those today. So now if you want really low tax, what are you looking at? You're looking at places like Gibraltar, Hong Kong, Labuan, Georgia, maybe Estonia in a weird sort of way, maybe Latvia in a weird sort of way, Hungary, Montenegro, Bulgaria, Cyprus, Malta, that's like the US. Maybe Barbados. Barbados is a little bit, it's kind of like, maybe sometimes Cayman Islands and UAE, of course. So that's probably the rundown of the ones you're most likely going to look at in today's day and age from a tax standpoint, right? Doesn't mean that they're going to be, but possibly. All right, so moving on from tax, what are you going to look at next? Well, the most important thing, like one of the initial places we start today is what can we do in terms of banking? Banking is a disastrously challenging thing to deal with today. So what do we want? Well, we want to say, all right, fantastic. Let's see what we can see. If we can go and we can say, all right, let's set up banking. here's the thing you have to realize today. Today, most of these offshore countries, like the traditional tax havens, like I said, the Nevis, the Anguilla, the Belize, the et cetera, all those places, you basically can't get bank accounts for companies there. So they're useless, right? Like a company is usually useless unless, say, you're only using it for crypto or something like that, if you cannot get a bank account. So for us, we want to pay attention right away to the banking. This is one of the biggest things. I'm thinking right away, like, can we get banking? So Hong Kong is I could compare Hong Kong, let's say, to Labuan, okay? On the surface, in theory, if I can get a no tax regime in Hong Kong, which means that I can get an offshore exemption, then in theory the tax rate would be lower than in Labuan. However, it's probably harder for me to get banking in Hong Kong than in Labuan, so I might go with Labuan. Now there's other business advantages of Labuan, like lower cost of labor in Malaysia and things like this. So we get into these complexities, right? This is an important consideration. What is our situation with banking? Here, this is ruled out a lot of places. So for example, people will call me up. They're like, oh, Malta. I'm like, great, where are you gonna bank? Because you can't bank in Malta. You're pretty much screwed there. Bank of Valletta, the biggest, best bank there, almost certainly won't open for you. Even if you're a local, you're gonna have a hard time opening there, which is crazy, You can say, hey, Gibraltar, I love Gibraltar. We opened a lot of companies in Gibraltar. I guess I didn't mention places like Jersey, Guernsey, Alderney, Sark, Isle of Man before. So under the right circumstances, you would look at typically Jersey and Isle of Man out of those. But anyway, so Gibraltar. Gibraltar is a place that, I like Gibraltar a lot. There's a lot of great things about Gibraltar. Tough to get banking for a Gibraltar company today. Your options are pretty limited. What else can we look at? Well, we can say Bulgaria. Bulgaria actually has some decent banking options. So what a lot of people are saying today is they're like, okay, it's 10% tax, but you know what? I'm kind of happy to pay 10% tax because at least I can show somebody I paid tax. This seems legitimate. And I have pretty decent banking options. It's fairly low cost. So that's something else. You can get something similar with Hungary. You can, on and on and on. There's a bunch of different places that you could look. Okay, so that's the next piece to consider aside from taxes, banking. Then we come to costs. Now, costs, we're really looking at the costs of forming and maintaining the company. So this is independent a little bit of something like wages. So this is one of the reasons how come we wouldn't particularly like someplace like UAE. It's expensive to form a company in UAE. It's not so expensive to maintain it per se, but it's not cheap either, right? So those high startup costs are going to drive a lot of people away versus if you go to, say, Bulgaria, it's fairly inexpensive, right? So that's something to consider. What's next in there? The actual costs of operation. So this is, can I have people? Now, this has changed a lot over the years because historically, you were in a situation where you'd probably form the company there and you'd have to have people there, right? Or more traditionally, you would just try and hide money. But if you were actually running a real business, where your business was where your people were. Today, you have remote workers, and so you could have employees in Serbia or Philippines or wherever else where it's inexpensive to get them, and it doesn't much matter where the company is. Well, more and more that is not the case. More and more, you want to have substance where your business is, okay? So, hey, I'm gonna have employees, I'm gonna have an office in this country, and therefore I'm then going to turn around and I'm going to have a business there. I'm gonna have a bank account there. And so in that sense, we're looking at where can I get a good supply of relatively low cost people. So this is one of the reasons I dislike Hong Kong. Hong Kong, it's pretty expensive to operate there. On the flip side, I might look at a place like Montenegro where it's maybe cheap, but I have a small pool of candidates. So that's not so great for me. Whereas if I can look at some other place like, say, Malaysia, Thailand, stuff like this where there's a relatively large pool of people, then that's pretty good. Hungary is maybe a little better. Bulgaria is a little bit better. Stuff like that, okay? So that's the next piece. After that, what is the situation with respect to regulations? all right, we generally want to have a place that's going to be conducive to us. So in a lot of businesses, this doesn't matter that much, right? Maybe there's no regulatory issues for you. But what if you're in crypto? What if you're doing cannabis? What if you're doing something in the adult industry? What if you're doing something in the gaming industry? What if you're doing something in, I don't know, pick any random industry that this is relevant for, some sort of regulated like financial services, on and on and on. This becomes really important to you, right? So you have to consider that. Next, what do we get into? What are the payment infrastructure needs, etc.? So for example, if I want to accept credit cards, that's tougher if I'm, say, in Dubai. That's going to be tougher if I'm in, well, actually, it's more expensive if I'm in Hong Kong, say. It'll be cheaper if I'm in the US, it's cheaper if I'm in Europe, which is one of the reasons why we used to like Gibraltar, was we could have low payment processing costs and low tax. It's a nice mix, right? What else is there? The last thing I think that's relevant is how is it affected by your customers, okay? So we talked about where your operations are, your costs, your management costs, etc. But what about your customers? For example, let's say that I'm selling to Americans. Now, maybe I'm in Germany, I'm in Australia, I'm in wherever. Now, say I'm in Australia, well, it might be a hassle for me to process payments via credit card for American customers in US dollars. So I may have conversion costs back and forth, which erodes my margins, right? Let's say it is a 2.5% fee to convert from US dollars to Australian dollars. Then say I'm spending in US dollars again, I may have to go back and forth twice. I'm losing 5% of revenue, which if my margins are 20%, that's like 25% of profits, right? That's a really bad blow to me there. That's probably an extreme example, but there's a lot of cases where, say you're pulling out of a PayPal account, you charged in US dollars, you're pulling out of there into a Hong Kong bank account, they're hitting you with a few percent conversion fee there, and then you're turning around and you're spending, say in US dollars, to go and do your advertising, right? So that's an example. It might be an equivalent in euros. So we want to pay attention to where are our customers and what's relevant to us in that regard. And we're going to take all those pieces and we're going to combine them into what is the most optimized location for us. And so, you know, the places that we most frequently use today are places like Georgia. There's some special types of companies. Labuan is quite a common one. We might use Gibraltar if we can, US LLCs, potentially Cyprus, potentially Hungary. You know, a few of these are kind of the most common places that we're likely to look. So anyway, I hope that gives you guys a little bit of an idea. Like I said, there's a lot to think about. And so I really encourage you to reach out to us and say, okay, hey, you know, for my situation, what makes the most sense? Because you put in a little bit of effort right now that is going to have a long-term payoff, right? You're probably going to have this company for 5-10 years. And that's going to make a difference. One thing we didn't talk about was raising capital. You know, what are your investors going to be comfortable with if you're in that situation? So take a look at it, consider what the options are for you. Reach out to us if you have questions. Reach out to us if you'd like help to set up the company, opening the bank account. Companies aren't as big a deal, but bank accounts are a disaster if you don't know what you're doing. And we'll look forward to talking to you guys on the next video.